We have to come back to what is really important. If, for example, material goods and fame and all of these things could create happiness, why have you so many stars using drugs and we just had recently the suicide and all of these things? Why are so many rich, famous people so miserable?
Anton, thank you very much for coming here. Now, we've both read your book, 한국인들의 이상한 행복, and it's really cool.
Thank you.
Love it. But before we talk about the book and the ideas in the book and your analysis of contemporary Korean society and the way you do all of this in the Korean language as well, I thought it'd be interesting to get some understanding of your foundations, because just before we started, you've been conversing so naturally in Korean, and I thought I'd try to understand you a little bit through Buddhism and Taekwondo, because these seem to have affected and shaped your journey to Korea and things like this. So shall we maybe, which one comes first for you, Taekwondo or Buddhism?
Well, it started definitely with Taekwondo.
Yeah.
When I was relatively young, I started practicing martial arts. I had always been fascinated with Asian culture from a very young age, for no particular reason, I guess. But anyway, so I was always interested. And at some point, I just started with Taekwondo, and I was looking around. I'm from Hamburg in Germany, and I looked around at different martial arts school, different Japanese martial arts, different martial arts in general.
Yeah.
And for me, it was most important not so much what martial art I practiced, but who was teaching me.
Right.
And so the master was most important to me. And when I met my master, at the time, I realized, okay, this is the man I had been looking for. And then I practiced with him for many years. And during the practice of martial arts and his teachings, because his teaching, he always said, if you, in Korean we say yang, right? Western people mostly know it as yin yang. But so there always needs to be a balance. So if you learn to hurt or destroy, you also have to learn to heal. So we learned the basics of Oriental philosophy, of Oriental medicine, of acupuncture, and all of these things. So he was teaching us not just one side of the path, the Do, but also the other side. And I thought that was really the kind of way I wanted to learn. So maybe if my master would have been a Japanese master, maybe my life would have gone in a complete different direction, right?
So this was a Korean master in Hamburg,
This
Germany.
was a Korean master, yeah.
Wow.
He used to teach the German national team and Taekwondo. And then at some point he opened the school, Taekwondo Tojang, in Hamburg. And that's where I met him and got to know him, his wife, his family, and practiced there for many years. Got exposed to Korean culture, Korean martial arts, Korean food. That's how my fascination with Korea started. And because, as explained, he also trained us in different things. So we had meditation, and he invited a Korean monk at some point to our dojang, who was traveling in Europe. And this monk, that time I translated German English for the monk. I didn't know any Korean at the time. And the monk said, "Oh, well, you seem very interested in Zen Buddhism." And I said, "Yeah, I am, and I read many books and things like that." And then he said, "Well, if you're really interested, you should come to Korea. I'll teach you." And then I thought, yeah, what a crazy idea, going to Korea. And then
When was this? What year are we talking
that
roughly?
That was in 90... It must have been end of 93, I suppose.
Because Korea wouldn't have been that well known, I don't think, then. It's not like it is now.
No,
it's completely
not
different.
nearly anywhere near. So at that time I was still doing my mandatory civil service. In Germany, we either have to go to the military or do civil service. I'm not a big fan of the military, so I went to civil service. And anyway, I decided I'll do that. And so and then basically I finished my civil service, and then I went to Korea in 94.
Can you tell us a little bit more about Taekwondo? I work with, and I know, a gentleman called Steve Capener. I'm not sure if you know him. He was on the American international team, but he goes on these huge tirades about Taekwondo today of turning into some K-pop performances and dances. I'm just curious, in your eyes, what is Taekwondo? How would you describe it? How is it different from judo or karate or jiu-jitsu? Or what is it, Anton?
Well, first, Taekwondo is not that really old traditional martial arts that many people think it is. It was actually more a modern version or mix of different other things, or a style that was created comparatively recently. And it is very similar in many ways to karate, though, I would say. And if you look at it, the structure of it and so on and so on. So it is very more aggressive. There are more defenses like judo or aikido or things like that. Is more forward aggressive. And I would agree with your friend maybe to some extent that it has a little bit come also since it became kind of a Olympic discipline. I think that changed a lot, the style of fighting. Because in these disciplines, all you need to do in Olympics, you don't have to actually knock down your opponent or something. It's more, if the touch is there, then it's a point, right? But that touch on the street in a real fight wouldn't do anything. No. I'm sure all of these athletes, they could really also fight if they want to. But what we see in a Taekwondo tournament, also when I look at that, I said, no, that's not Taekwondo. That's not how I learned it, because my master was from Busan, more of a street fighter guy back in the day. And so he said, you hit once and the other guy hits the floor. That's the only 2 hits that it should take. Nice. And it's not about this competition style making points. So, and I thought that is how it should be in a way.
The irony of you not liking the military while being probably one of the more dangerous men walking the streets is not lost. Could you maybe just give us one of the ideas of Taekwondo, or a foundation or a concept? Because some of them you're using the opponent's energy against them and things like this, but I'm not sure, are there any sort of common or core ideas or fundamentals of Taekwondo as you learned it?
I think really, again, as mentioned before, it really depends on who's teaching it. So if you have a modern teaching, which is more of a competition style Taekwondo, then maybe the objective is to get as many points as possible and win the tournament. But the way I learned it is just a matter of first of respect and physical. You have to build up your flexibility, your strength, and be very hard training. And I think the most important lessons that I took from Taekwondo is not so much how to defend myself or something. It gives you a state of mind, and it gives you a little bit of feeling of achievement, of course, but it also was how we were trained. So there was this episode, for example, where we had these week-long sessions in the German summer heat, which is near close to the Korean summer heat, but it's hot enough on a hot day. And we had trained for hours, and then he said, "Okay, can we do another round?" And then we were like, "No, master, we're really done. We're totally done." And he said, "Are you completely done, or is there a little bit of energy left?" And we're like, "No, serious, master, we're completely done." He said, "Okay, then we start now." And this is where you extend your boundaries and where you are pushed beyond out of your comfort zone and where you start to realize how much you can actually do. And I think those are the vital lessons. But that is not something that anybody will learn if you practice Taekwondo. That is something that you learn when you practice with a good master. And this is something you could learn with Kung Fu or Karate or any martial art. But as mentioned, compared to like defensive martial artists like Aikido using a lot of the energy or Judo, being much more defensive in that style. Of course, it is more of an aggressive. There's a reason they teach it in the Korean military, for example. And so.
What's master in that sense? Is it Sonsengnim or is it something different in the Taekwondo sense?
Sabomnim.
Okay, that would make sense. Any thoughts on Taekwondo these days for your generation, Yunso? Like, does your boyfriend do it? Do you go to like Hapkido, Hagwons, or is it just something for the military?
Yeah, if you ask Korean Gen Z with the Taekwondo, they would probably say, "Oh, I've done it when I was in elementary school or something like that," because it's a like starter pack, like Korean starter pack. And they would also brag about their like belt color, because when you go like higher level, you change your belt color, right?
Right.
And if you do Taekwondo in adult age, that would be seen more like art or just like a choreography, more than a like elementary school thing. Yeah, those two are so different.
I love the idea that it's a starter pack for young children, just to get that Koreanness into them from an early age. And I can see them all standing there doing this. And, it's fascinating.
It's more, I mean, my son went to these kind of Taekwondo classes when he was still like in kindergarten, basically. But I also didn't like it really. He also did Japanese Kendo, but I was also not really happy with it because I mean, you don't have to beat the crap out of your opponents. Obviously, that's not the idea. But there should be a sense of like responsibility, and this should not be entertaining or something. Give the kids something to do. This is a martial art. This is a do. This is a way of life, and you should have some respect. And a certain amount of suffering is part of that path.
Yes.
And to just have it nice, and nobody should be getting too stressed out, and nobody should be sweating too much, then I think it's not what it should be. Then you should do something else. You know, you can play all kinds of other games, but using this for children in kindergarten is, I think, not the right way. And it's a little bit of a shame. I think that martial arts in their true form actually don't have such a high standing in Korea anymore.
Yeah, maybe because they've tried so hard. It's become sort of like physical education or cheuk or just babysitting.
Right.
Give them some chance to run around. Give them something to do. Give them a belt. And
use their energy, and so they're not running around in the house that much. Yeah, but that is not what martial arts was meant for. And of course, it comes from a background of war and fighting, but it has become over the centuries and decades. Obviously, it has become a form also to build yourself up, not only physically but also mentally. And it's not a children entertainment thing. It is something very serious.
And because you find the true value in it when you suffer, when you redefine your boundaries of what you're capable of, and when you experience failure, or once you experience that pain, then it changes your mind. That connection between the mental and physical being, I think, is so very true, so very important. You've mentioned a couple of times the idea of to, the way. You've mentioned yang as well, the yin yang. So maybe going from this Taekwondo to Buddhism, there's many different types of Buddhism. You got invited to come to Korea to study by a monk. Can you tell us about Buddhism as you've learned it, as you've understood it, as it's been part of your life, please?
Well, Buddhism, there are, as you mentioned, several types. I think the main difference is Theravada and Mahayana. Theravada is the more traditional form with the saffron robes, and which you will find in, for example, in Sri Lanka and most of Southeast Asia. And Mahayana, called the big vehicle, is found in Northeast Asia and Vietnam. So Vietnam is an interesting case because it has geographically it belongs to Southeast Asia, but culturally it has quite strong influence from Northeast Asia, actually. And Buddhism is a proof of that. And so these are the two main directions. And of course there are different sects, but that is the biggest difference, I think. And Zen Buddhism is, again, a group within Mahayana Buddhism. And to me, it is the most clear form, a simplistic form of Buddhism, because it really comes back to the what I would consider the roots. There's the religious form of Buddhism, and there is kind of Zen. And Zen, in its essence, should not be religious. It should be open to any religion, and anybody can practice it, because it is not about Buddha is not a deity, and you don't have to believe in it. What I really always liked about Buddhism is that Buddha said, even if you believe in me with all your heart, it will not help you. You have to understand what I understood. Only that can help you. And to me, that is a very grown-up religion in a sense, if you would even want to call it a religion as such. It is one of the 6 major religions of the world, but it's actually it is more a way of life than a religion as such. And it's not centering about a god or some myth of something. It even doesn't matter if Buddha ever said these words or not. It doesn't matter. What matters is the message that has been transmitted over centuries, and that is that you have to find yourself. I mean, the most famous mantra of Buddhism is Om Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum means the jewel is inside, inside the lotus. So don't look outside of yourself. And all the other major religions are very much focused on you are nothing, but God is everything. All the gods are everything, and you are helpless without the gods. And Buddhism is kind of the complete opposite of that, and that's something I always liked.
Psychological almost. It's focusing on that introspection. Hinduism has that Atman is Brahman, that there is something inside of you connected to a bigger one. But just to go into a little bit more, the jewel is inside you, and you said that we can never get to Buddha or the truth just through faith alone. We need to understand. I guess from Zen Buddhism, it's like koans and these kind of things designed to provoke enlightenment, like what is the sound of one hand clapping and things like this. Could you perhaps maybe speak about some of the ideas or methods, or I'm not asking you to give us the key to enlightenment right here, because that would just, well, if you could, but the jewel is inside.
I have it somewhere here.
The jewel is inside is one thing.
Yeah.
Any more of these ideas that are important or essential or a way of being for this type of Buddhism, Anton?
Well, Zen, again, is focused very much on hard practice, like martial arts. So it's repetition, it's sitting on a cushion, staring at the wall, so to speak, and the koans can be, there are different schools of Zen, and some use koans, some don't, and but the key focus is always to understand yourself and to get a deeper understanding of what life is about. The thing is, basically, I would say that one of the basic ideas is that there is the mind and your true self. And a picture that is often used in Zen and modern Zen is basically your true self is the driver of the car, but your mind is always sitting next to you and talking to you all the time. And so at some point you believe that this guy, you're actually in charge and you're holding the wheel, but the guy next to you is talking to you so much that at some point you do whatever this person wants. And this is kind of the situation that we have, that this person beside you, this mind, says, oh, you have to have this to achieve happiness. Or if you get this car, if you get this girl, if you get this promotion, if you get this house, then happiness will come. But it never does. Because actually desire, especially for material things, there is no boundary. It's endless as the universe. So whatever you have, you will always ache for something more. And to cut through this and to realize that first my desires, and this is not just a desire for material things, for love, for fame, but it is also feelings like anger and all of these things, that they only have as much control over your life and happiness as much as you give to them. So let me give you an example. So, for example, you have worked in a company for a couple of years, and suddenly you get fired, and you're really sad and depressed and things like that. Ask yourself a simple question. Is it the boss who put you in this misery that you are now in? Like, that's what 99% would say. That was like, or maybe more. So like, yeah, my boss is screwed up and now I'm so miserable because of my boss. Or is it your attachment to the status that this position gave you, to the monthly payment that gave you? If you wouldn't have given so much weight to your position and to the money that you use to support your maybe fancy lifestyle or something, you wouldn't feel that pain. That pain doesn't come from your boss firing you. This pain comes from how much basically you invested yourself into these material things, the status, the money, the work itself, the satisfaction that you got from it. So if you see that you have more responsibility, and it's not always other people who are in charge of your misery, but it's very much yourself who can put yourself into misery, but also the good side is can get yourself out of this misery. And I think that is the basic message, that try to be in the moment, try to realize what's really happening, and try to see how much control you really give your emotions, your desires, and things like that.
you converted? Have you become a Buddhist?
Kind of. Because I remember hearing some story from people who believe in Buddhism, and the people was talking about when you're just holding a cactus.
Yeah.
And then is it the cactus that hurts you, or is it your hand that holding cactus is hurting you? I thought that it explains a lot.
Yeah, it's a similar way. Yeah. It's like how you see things. Sometimes it's the same thing, but if you change your perspective on this very thing, your whole world can change.
Yeah. It's very helpful.
Yeah.
I want to come back to the help idea. It's like when you see the flag blowing in the wind on the mountain over there. You say, oh, look, the flag is moving. And you say, no. And you say, oh, the wind is moving. Say, no. The mind is moving. Yeah. The mind is doing all of this. I really love the old story about the Chinese farmer whose horse runs away. And somebody says to him, that's such terrible news. Your horse has run away. And the farmer says, good news, bad news, who can tell?
Exactly, yeah.
And then the horse comes back. It's got more horses. And the story goes on and on. But it's about, for those that don't know, go and find it. It takes a while to tell, but it's this idea that we shouldn't have attachment to something. And I believe that's really what you're saying. There's a couple of things I just want to pick at here, Anton. One is that for the past week or so, it's always been coming up this. First, it was when I was looking at Carl Jung's work, the difference between the self, the capital S self, and the ego, and the differences between those. Yesterday, when we were speaking to 선울한 여름밤, a psychologist here, she was telling us you have your real self and your ideal self, and the ideal self is dangerous because it's this thing that you can never achieve, this desire. And what you've described as well, the person telling you in this passenger seat, do this, and this real self here, it sounds so similar. And I'm wondering, it feels like Buddhism is in some ways a cure for modern society. That might be overstating it, but I feel that a lot of people in the modern world, we become attached to things. We see our real self online or in these constructions that we make, and we see unhappiness spreading. Is there some kind of deep wisdom in there, irrespective of all the religion aspects of it, that it's a cure for us in some way? It's psychological.
Absolutely. And because I think society is drifting in the opposite direction from what I just described. So Korea, for example, could be called the most materialistic country in the world because if you count it down per capita, no other nation in the world people spend more money on luxury goods, and the use showing how much you have of fancy cars and fancy clothes and stuff like that is so hugely important in this country. So there is this materialistic part, and but also with the SNS culture, people almost create an avatar of themselves, and they create an online being that actually doesn't really exist. So I also said like that I have the feeling that these days it's more important to appear happy than to actually be happy. So you project a certain happiness, and then, but over time, if you start to create this persona which has the really cute girlfriend or nice looking boyfriend, and you have all the jewelry and all the clothings, and you go to these fancy resorts, and you have this really great lifestyle, which is just maybe 1 or 2% of your life, and the rest is really crap. But you feel urged to support this image that you have created, and you have to feed it, and it becomes almost like a demon to some extent that eats up your life and your energy and all your money and everything. And so I think to cut through this is really, really important, and that we have to come back to what is really important. If, for example, material goods and fame and all of these things could create happiness, why have you so many stars using drugs, and we just had recently the suicide and all of these things? Why are so many rich, famous people so miserable? That only drugs can give them a little bit of an elevation of feeling happiness. Because to me, getting all the things that you want is not heaven. That is hell. If you get all the things that you want, you end up in hell. Because the thing is, many people feel like there's a hole in their mind or in their soul. but they have still this hope. If I have money, if I have this, if I have that, this hole will go away. So through the hope, they can carry on and overcome their depression and their feeling of maybe self-loathing to some extent. But if you're rich and famous and you have all the things that you always wanted, and this hole doesn't go away, then what do you do? And I think this is what creates this. That is why many K-pop stars, actors, and so go to drugs or alcoholism or even suicide at some point, because nothing can make this hole go away. Because all of the things that society and maybe your parents or everybody told you that would make it go away, it doesn't make it go away. You're already rich, you're already famous, you're already loved from all your fans. So you have everything, and still you have nothing.
And we're told to love everything, actually. It's almost become part of our culture to consume, to desire. It's almost not our fault. In some ways, of course, we do have some control over it, but to succeed in this world, we're almost meant to sort of commodify ourselves and become an entrepreneur of our identity and put it out there. And what I agree with you 100% is this desire can never be satiated, and it just you said it becomes a demon. And one of the things I've often thought about is that we've lost our narratives, we've lost stories, and we've lost tales of the demons and the horses and the dragons, and we tell each other about a 3.4% increase in this, and that doesn't move anybody. That doesn't give us anything. I heard this brilliant expression of what hell is. You just mentioned it. The hell is experiencing the bad experiences your choices gave to other people. So hell is not a place, but all of the bad things that you've done that you made other people experience, hell is when you have to experience those things, conscious of what you've done to those people. So if you've made people sad, unhappy, crying, if you've been cheating on somebody, done all this, you then have to experience that, knowing that's what you put other people through. And I heard that and I was like, that's heartbreaking. It's just a big window of karma coming at your life. And wow,
that is the concept of karma.
Yeah.
You know, that and that's also another thing, because we're talking about Buddhism and everything, which I really liked.
That was past tense, Anton.
Yeah, no, which I really like.
Okay, sorry.
It's there is no forgiveness in that sense. And though forgiveness is a great idea, but in Buddhism, actually, whatever you do, it will come back to you. And you can't say at the end of many bad deeds that, oh, I'm so sorry, and everything is erased. That concept doesn't exist in Buddhism. If you do bad things, they will come back to you. And I think that is, in a way, how life should be. There should be some kind of some kind of this idea that if you just say sorry, I mean, of course, forgiveness, I'm not against forgiveness on a personal level or anything at all, but this idea, because I believe in a religion, and I maybe even look at what's happening in around the world. People murder in the name of religion and even think they will get benefits for that and stuff like that. How can that be religion? How can that be anything that people support? Buddhism says you kill people, this will come back to you, and not in a good way. And any other religion that tells you murdering and mutilating other people, your God will love this. Sorry, I cannot get behind that.
Are you a vegetarian?
No, I'm not. I used to live as a vegetarian for a long time because I spent many years in monasteries. But one of the reasons why it was clear to me I couldn't pursue a path as a monk was I love to eat meat, I have to admit.
We do have a lot of Buddhists on one side of our family over here, and I've spent quite a bit of time at the temples and I've never seen happier people than some of the monks that I meet. I don't know if happy is the word, but one of the more recent ones I met, he just had one eyebrow. It was a very clear monobrow that just went across, and the rest of him was bald. But one of him, and he was just beaming with just smile and warmth and happiness. And you know, we've met some, I'm sure some rich people, some powerful people, some influential people, and these are meant to be the stars, the celebrities, the big people. But I've never seen someone more satisfied with everything than some of the monks that I've seen. You can see it radiating off them.
It's
I think,
true.
Sometimes.
That is what actually got me into Buddhism, because I come from a Christian country, and I had met many Christian people or something like this, not a particular religious family, but still never anything impressed me. But I saw these monks and at least some of them, and I said, like, whatever they got, I want that, because that is a feeling. They had this feeling of lightness and something. They were not trying to convince me of anything, and they just told me that is how it is, and I felt there is truth there. And for the first time I felt like, I've seen truth. And it doesn't have to be Buddhism. I think this, like I said, the path of Zen, for example, is open to all religions, and I practice with people from different religions in monasteries together. It's a way of finding your true self, and I think that is something that, in the end, should be the goal for any religion. So that is, I think, and as you said before, maybe to look into this. Some kind of detach yourself from your desires a little bit and look at, are the things that I'm pursuing in my life, are these the things that actually really make me happy or will make me happy in the future? That is a very, very long and hard stare you should do at your life. And I think that's what I talk a lot about in my book, because people are so willing to follow in Korea, where society seems to dominate every decision you make. Every decision is already made for you. But if this doesn't make you happy, of course you can blame society, and for some extent I can understand that. But at the end of the day, you're the only one who can save yourself. Don't expect anybody to come and save you. And if your life is miserable, and it has been for 10 years, if you follow this path another 10 years, you know what Albert Einstein says, like repeating the same thing and expecting a different outcome, that's insanity. So I would say if you pursue a path in your life and it's making you miserable, and just continuing on and hoping that at some point it will in a miracle it will turn around, that's insanity. If you're not happy with your life, you have to change it. And the biggest blocker is fear. People are afraid to cross boundaries, to experience something new. They rather stick with the misery they know than to. They are more afraid to lose whatever they have than to experience something new and say, okay, I'll make a cut here. I need to change my life. And there are very few people who can actually do it.
Speaking of happiness, I wanted to ask you about two things about 무소유 thing in Buddhism, because as you know, Korea is highly materialistic society, right?
Yeah.
So first of all, do you think that modern Koreans need to practice 무소유 or close to that? And the second question is 무소유 possible in Korean society?
Maybe you have to explain what 무소유 means.
Yeah. As I believe, I'm not an expert. You have lived more in Korea than I lived, so I'm not very proud to say things. As I believe, 무소유 is the thing that you should not really obsess over materialistic things, and you even have to throw away the things that distracts you from your true self to be really happy and really satisfied, as the monk you said.
I think detachment is really the important word that you, I think you can still enjoy good things in your life. You can have good food, you can have nice things. The question is, do you own these things or do they own you?
Oh.
Right.
So if there is something which you cannot give away anymore, you don't own it anymore. It has begun to own you. And it has sometimes, items can become part of your persona or your image, the image that of your ego, what you have of yourself. So I think this kind of detachment, if you're not attached to something, having good things is no problem. But if you become totally attached to them, and I think that is the problem that we see not only in Korean society, but in Korean society in particular, that people become extremely attached and kind of identify themselves over the things they own.
Yeah.
They think if I have this jacket, I belong to a certain group. or if I drive this kind of car, I belong to this kind of group. So the car is not the problem, the jacket is not the problem. But if you start to identify yourself or basically said, I'm that kind of person because I have this item, who's the owner? And that's the thing. So I would definitely say that Korean people have this very materialistic path. And the reason is, where did this come from? I think it's a very natural thing. And for example, if you look at rap music, for example, rap music is a little bit the kind of music style where first this materialistic thing was very much focused on, I have this big chain, I drive this big car, and you're all trash, and I have much more money, I have so much money I can't count it anymore. And where did rap music started? From black people. So black people, for example, for a long time of their history in the United States were suppressed and relatively poor. And so for the first time, people have money. And then they want to show it. And they want to talk about it. That finally I have something. And I think, if you look at many rappers, for example, gold chains and diamond rings and all of this, or look at all the money I have, and this big car and things like that. Korea is a little bit like that. Korea used to be extremely poor for a very long time. And finally we got money.
Yeah.
And finally we got attention. So let's show how much we have. I think that is to some extent very understandable. Sadly, it's not a path to happiness. And bragging about how much you have and identifying yourself through the objects that you own can give you a short-time feeling of bliss or a short-time feeling of satisfaction. But satisfaction or a moment of bliss is not happiness. Happiness is something that I think true happiness you can only reach if you detach yourself from objects, not through gaining more and more objects. And I think this is where Korea just went the wrong way, where I think they were closer to happiness back in the day. So for example, my experience, now it's 30 years, it's from 94 to 2024. So people had much less in the 90s, but I think they were much happier.
Is that because the gap between the rich and the gap between the rich and the poor was lower, that they were all kind of equal in their poverty? Of course, they were still rich people,
sure.
But they felt less pressure and they felt less of that more 빈부격차, that gap between. Was it related to that, or?
I think so, and it's different reasons. I also think when you're moving up every year, you always feel like, it's getting better and better and better, and that also creates a certain happiness. But people were a little bit more simple, and the joys were more simple. There was no brand. Not everybody was running around with Gucci and Moncler or a jacket or whatever, People had simple clothing, and like imported cars was rare that you had people with imported cars. So maybe everybody was a little bit more on the level, and people were more on a the human connection, the family connection was much more important back in the day, I think. And these days, and you had real friends. Yeah. There was no internet, and so you actually had real friends. And now you have many likes and many followers and very few friends sometimes. And so I think it's why Korea has such a low birth rate and so high suicide rate and seems to be a depressed country of sorts. I think there's not one single reason, but it's a cocktail of different things that happened. And Korea has a very unique story, especially over the last 50 years, I would say. It's there is no story in the world that really can be compared to a Korean story, I would say. And this kind of cocktail blessed Korea from rock bottom to number 10 in the world economically and one of the most popular nations these days. And so there were a lot of blessings the country received. But the side effects of these blessings, especially when they come in such a short period, can be overwhelming. And I sometimes compare Korea to these child Hollywood stars, like who get famous overnight with a movie and suddenly get already $2-3 million for the next year, and they're still in primary school. So a lot of these end up relatively miserable. They start using drugs and things like that because as you cannot cope with the speed of the riches that you get. You're still a child, and I think Korea needed more time for the development they made from rock bottom to top 10 in the world. But they didn't have this time. So it all happened, historically seen, overnight. And there are side effects. And we're experiencing the side effects of that now.
I agree. Thank you for your insight.
The idea of comparing Korean nouveau riche or people like that flexing. Flex is a big word. Like the idea of, we've been talking about Han recently, and you ask young people about Han, they're like, we don't have Han, we like flex. Flex is a word they understand, which is what you were comparing to sort of, African American and gangster rap, and this idea of swag and showing off, and how it appears in Korea. And you see all people walking around with Louis Vuitton bags and things like this. And you can tell these people aren't particularly rich. Yeah. But the necessity to have that kind of bag is very clear and very obvious. I wonder if is it growing pains? Can Korea come out of this? So it's like a teenager. Sometimes when you're a teenager, you go through a gangster rap phase. And, I was driving around the south of England listening to Dr. Dre when I was 15. I did that. And... But I'm not saying it's only for teenagers, but sometimes you grow out of those phases. I wonder if we're looking at Korea as a very young, sort of in its teenage phase, because it's a relatively young country despite the long history, and it will eventually mature, like Anton, you have matured over your life. And
I hope.
Or is there a sense that we have a problem child Hollywood actor that's being given too much, and now what's done cannot be undone? Do you see the two different paths I'm trying to lay out here? I wonder if you have a take on that? Or
I think only time can tell, really, because I really hope that Korea will mature through this process. But it will be a very painful process, because I think Korea will lose a lot of that has been given to it in the next 15, 20 years or so. For example, I think a lot of the prosperity that we have achieved is not sustainable with this kind of birth rate and the geopolitical changes we're seeing, and so on and so on. So the question is, I think also in Hollywood you see people who succumb to this kind of thing, and who never come back, who never fully recover from that, and they're washed out people. Everybody still knows their name, but they never show up unless they trashed another car or something like this. And there are people who cleaned up their act after years of drug use and after lots of problems and so on, and are now again respected actors. For example, Robert Downey Jr., for example, or for example,
and Michael Jackson was the other one I was thinking of in my mind.
Yeah, for example, or Macaulay Culkin or something. For example, I don't think he has a big career going on. So things like that. So there are always people, and I think I have trust in the Korean people that there's a strength and resilience, and I have seen that, I've experienced that, and Korea has overcome over centuries. They have much worse problems they have overcome. The war and before that times, there were much harder times than the times we're seeing now. The question is now, has the new generation the strength of the old generation? I think the old generation in Korea, I really totally admire those people, because they are so strong and so centered in a way. And if I look at my wife's mother, for example, like, she never complains about anything, and she's always kind of cheerful and positive and works. Like if I come to her house, she never let me help anything, or even though she's much older, and I want to help and I almost feel bad, but she's like, no, you work so hard, rest, and she cooks and does everything, and never a single time I've heard her complain about anything. And so I really admire a lot of this generation that built up this country from to where it is now. The question is if the new generation, the younger generation, has the strength to overcome this crisis. But I think it's somewhere in their genes. So they might be a little bit more sensitive and wimpy in our perception, and I sometimes feel also a little bit angry with that, like that they're too come across as a little bit too wimpy. But I think when it comes down to it, I think they still have it. So if I would be a betting man, which I'm not, I would put my money on the Korean people.
Because it's a different challenge as well. It seems he's talking about you here, you and so you and your friends. He's got all this Latin and Malia and things like this going on. What do you think when you hear this? Do you think your generation has the strength and the courage to get through these things like the mothers and grandmothers of yesteryear? Or
I agree with you saying that older people are more strong and centered, and I also think that Gen Z type of Korean young people is more willing to start something, or they are more like engaging, but they don't really have the resilience to like recover from things because they were like treated more softer than the older generations before because they went through so much things. But Gen Z Koreans were raised in such a soft and protected way, so I guess we should learn more about resilience and being strong and being consistent. Then we can be hopeful, maybe.
Do you think your generation is more empathetic? You have more empathy, like 공감 towards different identities and people?
They
and things?
seem to be in SNS because we express feelings on SNS, but us, in my opinion, is more self-ego-centered. So we are more empathic on ourselves, not others. Like we say "우리," but we're not very.
Yeah, I think that's something almost anybody who has been here for some time, and also the Koreans, the older generation, really feels very strongly that the new generation is much more self-censored and much more concerned with their well-being. They used to be, everything in this country used to be uri, uri, uri. And I said they should change it. It should be now, na, 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 you know. A lot of that has changed. And that's not all bad, maybe, because obviously we're individuals. And the question is always, I don't judge good and bad, you know. I just think, does it make you happy? If it makes you happy, then fine, you know. But I don't think either extreme, because you asked me what are the centers of Buddhism. One thing the Buddha discovered, like, I don't know if you know the Buddha's life story a little bit, but the Buddha first, when he started practicing, was extreme austerity. And so he almost killed himself with austerity. And then he said, it's the middle path. You need to pursue the middle path. Extremes are not the way to find the path. So either extreme, and I think that also can be applied to maybe political sense, to left, to right, or something, you know. What we see now with the whole woke movement or the extreme leftist movement, I think actually, you know, they're coming close to the right and saying this needs to be cancelled, this needs to be forbidden. So every time you have extremes, be it religious extremes, political extremes, or other kind of extremes, extreme materialism, or something like this, then it rarely leads to happiness, I believe. So you always have to question yourself. Too hard can be not good. Too soft. I would say like a good blade is soft steel and hard steel together and hammered a lot, because the soft steel make the blade flexible. The strong steel make it that it doesn't bend. So what damas steel, as we say, or like a good Japanese blade, or it should be many layers and hammered of different kinds of steel. And I think this is the way it should be.
Yeah. The non-military man talking about weapons.
I like knives.
Yes.
I do like knives. I cook a lot, and I have a lot of damask knife in my kitchen.
Excellent. Before we get on to some of these ideas in your book, I just wanted to ask about Buddhism in modern society today. I mean, we asked you if you see much Taekwondo about and things like that. But in my ignorance, I thought when I came to Korea that I was going to be able to sit in the mountains with a guy with a white beard, smoke a pipe, and find my inner penguin. It's more Theravada, Southeast Asia, as you said. But you don't see much Buddhism in and around, like the capital city of Seoul. The temples are hidden in the mountains. Do you see or hear much of Buddhism from people around you? I mean, Christianity is very visible and things like this, and Saibi and cults are always there. Is it there in Gen Z's life or around you?
I think that it is there, and many Gen Z think Buddhism as a very positive thing because it's not very compelling to you. Like, it's not just do this thing. They're just peaceful, and that helps you find your inner peace by yourself. But for some of the religions, they feel more oppressed or suppressed because you have to go there by every Sunday or every Saturday, even when you're busy as a modern society people, and they have so much disciplines that are not really relevant to your real life. But many of my friends think as Buddhism as a very positive and very peaceful thing because of like some sort of freedom that gives you. And Buddhists do not really obsess over you to come to our religion or sort of thing. Like if you are to find Buddhism, you can find a way. We don't really force you to do things. So maybe that's why Buddhism seems like a quiet religion in society.
I like the idea of the Gonde monk all of a sudden, because you don't normally associate Buddhism with Gondes or like these boomers that force you to do these various things. We were speaking to this psychologist yesterday, and we was asking her, and she was very open about her own depression and her own things, saying that it was part of her, and that's why she spoke honestly about her troubles online. And she's saying, I've been depressed and I feel this, and it's not bad, it's part of me. So she was doing that yang. She was in touch with herself. And she gave us this rule yesterday, which I thought was fascinating. You talked about the golden mean, or the doctrine of the mean there, Anton. You also have the golden rule that appears in many religions. Do unto others as you would. Her message was this: treat yourself the way you treat other people, because we're normally very nice to other people. We meet them, we smile, we shake their hands. Hi, how are you? Very nice. Even we don't like them. And then we go home and we say, I'm such an idiot. I hate myself. And she just flipped it on her head and she said, treat yourself. Don't be rude to yourself. Treat yourself the way you treat other people. And I thought that was a fascinating reevaluation of some very long-standing wisdom there.
True. It depends, I guess, because my concern is more that people treat themselves a little bit too much, and too much concerned with their own well-being, what we just heard a little bit there, and less concerned with others' well-being, and more detached from other well-being. So, for example, when first, for example, in 2018, when people from Yemen, 540 people from Yemen came, it was more young people out on the streets demonstrating against them coming here than older people. So there was this overwhelming sense. I felt like we need to protect ourselves. Or look at what the doctors are doing now, for example. You know, like current government wants to increase the quota of doctors, so to speak. And to have especially more doctors in rural areas and things like that. And we have an aging society. We need doctors in this country. But all the doctors are like, oh, we're going on strike. And so is this really to protect the people or to protect their privileges? I'm not sure, actually. I'm not an expert in this, so maybe I'm on the wrong side of this discussion. Maybe I should dive deeper into this discussion before I talk on that. But you get the picture. So I think people overall... and that's something that I feel there's so much talk about equality and fairness in Korean society, and people say like you see people running around with these kind of is it real work or just kind of not fully contracted work and things like this, you know, and then people are granted like full work contracts, and everybody is like, not everybody like, yeah, that's a good start. Everybody like, why did they get that? And I didn't get this. So people are very much concerned these days, not with the overall good, unless it benefits themselves. And that is something I find very alarming, because if people come from a war-torn country, you should say, okay, we can afford that, you know, to have a few people and give shelter. But people are on the streets demonstrating. And if people, I'm demonstrating for the rights, for better workers' rights. But if somebody else gets and I don't get it, then I'm against that again. And things like that. So I think this is very... something we should look at very carefully, because do we really want good in the world, or do we only want good if it is good for me? Yeah, that's something I felt a lot, and I think nobody's free from that, you know. Like, I mean, I also treat myself, and sometimes maybe I'm not 100% polite, or I mistreat somebody or something like this. Or nobody's perfect, but we should always ask ourselves this question, and I think this is why because what you just mentioned, like treat others, treat yourself like others. I don't think we treat ourselves so badly. Maybe I think more the opposite. We should sometimes we should treat ourselves a little bit less good, and that doesn't mean harm ourselves or deprive ourselves, but look very hard in the mirror and look if you would like this person if it was not you, and if the decisions you're taking are really benefiting anybody except yourself.
It's hard to look in the mirror sometimes, Anton. It's very difficult. When you were saying that, I mean, I loved when I was reading your book, watching and reading you explain "not in my backyard" in Korean, because this is one of the things. We want good in the world, but I don't want that disabled school in my neighborhood. We want there to be peace and happiness, but no refugees here, please. And the way you explain this, so I think this is a brilliant time, maybe just to do a very smooth segue and come to your book here, which 한국인들의 이상한 행복. I've spoken to a couple of Korean people about this, and they said, I love the title. You say, yeah. Can we just maybe start with that, or what reactions you've gotten from this? Because my Korean teacher and people were like, I love that title.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It's very attractive.
Oh, really? Okay, that's good. Because I heard both things. I had also people. I did a film series on this book with a major Korean company, like a think tank. They do online teaching material, so to speak, and we talked about. And the producer said, I loved your book, but I really didn't like the title. And and I thought, I can understand it, because actually that title I did not select.
Okay.
I wanted a different title initially. And
what kind of title were you going for originally? Can you remember?
Yeah, basically, kind of, if you translate it into English, like a stained happiness or something, like an Orluk in an oder. Like actually the Korean title we thought of was like almost like the operated happiness. So you make something, because Korea is so famous for aesthetic surgery. So kind of the beauty is kind of created, but they thought the publisher thought maybe this is too strong, but I didn't like the idea of 이상하다 so much, because 이상하다 has a negative connotation in this kind of context. I would say it's strange a little bit, and I think it's a different kind of happiness, and I wouldn't agree with all the aspects of it, but they said this would be a good title, and I understand that it would also be appealing. So to hear that it is appealing, well, then they did a good job.
I want to pick up on very quickly 이상한, because Extraordinary Attorney Woo. It's a K-drama, but in Extraordinary, it means special. But in Korean, that was 이상한 변호사.
That's true.
How does 이상한 work? Does it mean like weird, strange? Does it have a positive nuance, sometimes, like in this context, or 우영우?
Not really. It has like double-sided meaning, because like there is Korean slang that 참 이상해, which means like, how can I explain this feeling? Like even when you're in love, or even when you have to do something, and then you can say 이상해, kind like casually, but you can mean strange or weird with 이상한. But when I first came up with your book title, when I just saw your book, I thought that 이상한 doesn't mean really bad, strange, or bad, weird. It just made me curious about what happiness is something weird or 이상한. What is 이상한 that he meant?
Yeah, it's a nice contrast, because 이상하다, weird, strange. How can happiness be weird or strange? Happiness should be always positive. And so I think that's why they came up with this title, and I also liked it in the end. But initially I had this feeling that it almost is a little bit offensive in a certain way, and I didn't want that to happen. I know there are parts in this book which maybe Korean people, depending on their perspective on things, find offensive, but in a way, or that bugs them a little bit, and that can't be avoided, I think, that sometimes people perceive things. But my general idea was, as I also say in the introduction, it is kind of a sweet, bitter love letter, actually, to Korea, because I wouldn't have written this book if I wouldn't love Korea with all my heart, because it's really it's saying the things that need to be said, and to be honest with somebody that you love. I think that is a true expression of love, not always saying everything is great, everything is so super and all the time, and never addressing the demons or the ugly things in the room. If you don't do that, then you're not a good friend or a good lover or whatever it is. So this is me trying to point out some of the things that I've seen over the last 30 years, and where I think change went maybe in the wrong direction, and also giving a few ideas or hints how we can remedy maybe some of the problems.
Yeah. It's very interesting because it's easy to do the gukbong narrative. It's easy to do the Korean #1 sparkling, and Korean people will generally love you for that.
Yeah.
And they will glad, but you didn't do that. You were willing to show the demons and things like this. There are many topics in this. Was there one that you thought this really needs to be said? And the one that you think it might change over time sometimes, or you have conversations, but you're hitting basically every hot topic about Korean society. This is not just about family, but this is family and education and money and marriage and love, and even the home and cooking and all of these things. Was there one that you thought, we need to say this?
Even though it's not a secret or anything, but I think the longest chapter is about education. And people always ask me, if you could change one thing in the country, what would it be? I think it would be the education, because I come from an education family. Both my parents were teachers, and I also came here and I taught at university, I taught at schools, and I'm teaching now to some extent, giving lectures or coming to these kind of talks. Is to some way, it's all part of teaching. But so teaching is a very powerful tool, and we talked about Taekwondo. That's how I came to Korea. You can change people with teaching, but if you start the wrong teachings with children, if you force children into something that they don't want to be, if you teach them materialism, if you teach them the wrong things, then it's very, very difficult to remedy some of these effects later. So if we want to have a better society, we need to start with teaching and education. And education to me is not only what happens in school or university, but it's what your parents tell you about what is valuable in life, what you should aim for in life. So education and all that belongs to this topic of education is the one thing where is the only chance, I think, where we can really change the system. But it's also the most difficult thing to change, because Korean people are so obsessed with the current system they're having. And even though most Koreans would even agree that the Korean system of education is screwed up, but still, again, not in my backyard, kind of like, okay, we should change this, but my kids are still in this system, so let's wait until my kids are out, and then you can change it all you want. So everybody has invested already so much of their time and money into this system, even though they understand it's bad, that they feel, a terrible sense of loss if things would be changed now. And so this brings us back to the point of, like, do you want real good education or only good education if it benefits your kids or something?
Is there a sense that I agree with you, is there a sense also among some Koreans that the education, as bad as it might be, that it works to a certain extent, that it's helped raise the country out of poverty, that you've gone from a very illiterate society to, I know standardized testing is a very hot button topic, but in like the PISA things, we see the OECD averages going down. We see literacy rates in Europe and things like that going down. Here in Korea, like, people can read and write and things like that. Is there a sense that, it sucks, but it works, or is that not a valid argument or pushback?
It works for something. But my argument is always, does it work for happiness? To me, happiness is the goal of life. If it works to make you rich but unhappy, strongly put, it works. Because we've seen the incredible success story, and the education system surely, to some extent, has something to do with that. You cannot take the education system out of the success story of Korea. My problem is that because of this intertwinement between the education and the success story, it's part of the misery. And it perpetuates itself. It's because it's such a long process. And education is linked to housing. Education is linked to birth rate. Education is linked to all the kind of problems that we're having right now. So if you want to take out one, you can't take without influencing all the others. So the trouble is, all of the major problems you have in Korea, that's not, okay, this is this problem, let's do this first and then we do the other. That's not how it works. Everything is intertwined. And that makes it so incredibly difficult. But I would say education is at the heart of it, because education is also that teaches us you have to be number one, you have to go to this university. And happiness comes from being a doctor and a lawyer. And why? Because you want to help people, because you want to judge people? No. Because that's where the money comes from. So at the core of things is you have to be successful to have more money, and money will give you happiness. And that is a lie. And we can only change it if we start with the education process, that you have to come back to a life where be a decent person, not just a successful person, a decent and happy person, even though you might have less money. If you travel in India or Southeast Asia, you will meet a lot of people who have much, much less money than the average Korean, but they seem much more happy and much more content, and they are much more polite, and they are much more willing to give you something or invite you to their home or things like that. I have had so many incredible experiences on my journeys. Just right now, just weeks ago, I was in Southeast Asia, and I had several experiences that had moved me deeply, because from people who don't earn a fraction of the money that I earn. And so it really humbled me again to see these people, their generosity and their politeness and things like that, which was very genuine. So yes, to come back to your question, of course the education system works in this whole machinery of Korea. But is the output of this machinery the output that we're actually aiming for? So I would rather be not literate and happy than reading all the books and be miserable, you know? So that is the question that we have to ask ourselves. And in that sense, I think the Korean education system is a failure.
I agree with you, because most of the Korean students are told that if you study hard enough and go to elite university, you will get happy when you turn 20. Those kind of myths. And I finished my high school years and I came to university. Am I happy? Not really. And then adults would say that if you go to like elite companies, you will be happy. And what next? Marriage or something? Then I should search for another happiness. It's not very, it's very endless. It's the ideal happiness does not really exist. It's a lie, as you tell. And Korean people tend to make a link between education and everything. If you have problem in your adulthood, then it's because you didn't study enough in your student era. If you didn't go to like elite university, it's because you didn't study well. If you didn't find the love of your life, it's because you didn't study blah, blah, blah kind of stuff. So I agree with you.
You know, there's a famous image of this donkey and a carrot dangling right in front of him, you know, on a stick. So it's always right there, but they can never reach it because with every meter they advance, the carrot also advances because it's attached to a stick, which is attached to themselves. So that is exactly what you're just describing, right? It's always the carrot is always there, this happiness, this bliss, but it's always there. You can almost see it, but you can never reach it because the more you advance, it's always the next thing. And so we have to cut through this, and that is hard, and it takes courage, and it is painful and frightening, and it's all of these things, but it's the only way. It's the only way. And I wish there would be an easy way out, or like, oh yeah, it was so easy. My life was also not easy to get where I am now. And people say like, oh, you might, maybe you have this nice house or you have this good life for yourself. And yeah, it's easy for you to say, you know. And so like, yeah, I didn't, nobody gave this to me, you know. I worked hard on these things, and And I choose a path. I went to Korea as a young man, and everybody said, you're crazy, you know. But I took a one-way ticket to Korea to study Buddhism. And I just never followed the money. I always followed what I believed was right. And money followed me to some extent. I'm by no means rich or anything, but I'm doing okay. And I can afford to have sometimes good meals or to travel somewhere. I have enough money so that I can live a comfortable life. I don't need a Ferrari or any Learjets or anything of that sort. I'm very content with what I have. But the thing is, I never aimed for these things. They kind of rather followed me because I choose the path that I wanted to go. And that was often frightening because I ventured into, when I came to Korea and when I said I'll move to Korea and I start my own company, I could have worked maybe for a German company, famous car company or chemical company, and I might earn more money than I earn now and have a comfortable living in a nice high-rise in Seoul somewhere or something like this. But I never have chosen this path. And I think I'm more happy because I have chosen this path. But it's not an easy thing. And you have to have the courage, and you have to be willing to endure and face your own fears. Your fears of failure, your fears of loneliness, your fear of maybe poverty if things don't work out the way you want them to do. And people always try to avoid pain and things they're afraid of. But this means that we build a prison around ourselves, and these prison walls, they are made out of our own fears. So you're the only one who can tear them down.
How does changing... I'm suddenly very motivated. You're great at this. How does changing the education work? Because if we agree, and Yunso does, and I'm sure many would agree with your diagnosis of the problems, that it's focused on goals rather that it's unattainable and always giving this carrot, the university, the job, and things like this that never satiate people. What's really interesting in your book is that you do, and you've just said, you learn lessons from Oman, you learn lessons from Southeast Asia, you learn lessons from countries that are far less economically developed than South Korea. How does the change in education take place? Is it a policy thing? Is it a case that Korea needs to learn to accept that other countries have something to teach it, and these countries might not always be this kind of 사대주의, look to the West and that look what Harvard does or something like this, but there are lessons elsewhere. If your diagnosis is correct, what next?
It's very difficult because, like I said, it's such a multifaceted issue, the whole education issue. But sometimes people say, okay, if you want to fix the education, like, what should we do? And I always say, like, if I would be president, I would just no more hagwons. Hagwons are forbidden, and everyone like, ooh. And I said, no, okay, I know I can't do that. But it goes a little bit in this direction because first, children need time to play.
Yes.
And children need free time. But of course, this brings us to the problem, how do the parents take care of them? They have to work. Now, just recently, the government said, just today, if you read the newspaper, it's like a primary school until 8 in the evening. From 7 in the morning, it's until 8 in the evening. That's 13 hours for primary children. Are you insane? That is the solution to the birth rate? Are you serious? So we're moving in the wrong direction, and we need more support for parents, and we need more children to be happy. And I think a lot of the reason, and that's what also people told me, if I asked young people, why don't you want to have children? And they said, I've been through hell. I don't want to send anybody through the hell I went through. So first we have to remove the hell things. Then people, and also a second thing is what really struck me and really, I was in Sejong City. There's a think tank there thinking about the demography things and so on and so on. And I talked to this guy and I said, why don't young people want to have children? And he said, they don't see family as something positive. The notion of family, which is such a crucial part of Korea, I always thought, and the bonding and family sticks together, and you have to be a family, and family is everything. Their perception of family is not very positive. It's just the father is always gone somewhere. The mother just drives them from one hagwon to the next, and actually in Korea, because of peryo, this kind of feeling that you shouldn't burden anybody with everything. You never talk to your parents about anything important. Not if you're depressed, or if you have a boyfriend, a girlfriend, or if you discover that you like the same sex or something. You would never talk to your parents about those things. They are probably the last people to know about it. So there is no trust. There is no deep connection in many families anymore as it used to be. And so he said, for young people like this, I want to have a family. And they're like, yeah, family? Yeah, I can totally live without that. And I was like, oh, Jesus. Well, then we screwed up. If the concept of family is not a positive notion anymore, then we need to fix that. And like I said, it's intertwined with education. And I don't know really where to start. At the end of the day, what I'm trying also with this book, or talking to people, giving lectures and things like this, is reevaluate your life and think about your life. And you can start with your children. I educate my son different. He basically doesn't go to hagwons. And I had a few battles with my wife because like, how is he gonna, later compete? And I said, like, trust me, he's gonna be more creative. He's gonna be. He has so many experiences. He traveled a lot with us. He has seen so many things. That is the currency actual CEOs want to see, not somebody who has good test results through repetition. And of course, he has the global stage to find a job later in life, as any Korean who speaks English has. But so I start to try to change things with lectures, books, and most of all with how I educate my own son. And that's where it starts.
Do you argue about what time your son goes to bed? I'm just curious from a personal one, because we have similar conversations, me and my wife, about the hagwons and the hapkido and the piano and the violin and the swimming and all of this. I completely agree. Kids shouldn't be in school till 8. Get them home at lunchtime. Bedtime always weirded me out here. I came from a society where young children go to bed at 7:38.
Exactly.
And
that's it.
Here they're running around till.
It's crazy. And it's our son is now 15. Now he goes to bed at 9:30 or something, or 10.
Wow, yeah.
Yeah, but before it used to be 7:30, 8. So every year he gets like about half an hour more. But when he was in primary school or something, it was definitely 7:30. Boom, off to bed. There are no late hagwons. He likes to do badminton or something. So I don't consider that a hagwon as such, because it's something he likes to do. And he, for some reason, beyond my comprehension, he likes math. I hate math. So he does attend, or he used to attend a math hagwon. But I always told him, if you don't want to go at any time anymore, I'll fight it out with your mom. But from my side, you don't have to go. Because I always say, like, no matter how much math you study, my iPhone will always be faster than you. But if you study something that, for example, like badminton, my iPhone can play badminton. My iPhone can swim. And so physical education is always something that is good. No computer, no AI can do that for you. So health, invest in yourself and that. And the second thing is learn things that AI and computers and smartphones can't do. And there are a lot of things. Languages, AI is getting better, obviously, in translating. But if you look at the current translation programs between English and Korean, lucky they're still very messy. And maybe in 10 years down the road, 20 years down the road, we don't need to learn languages to the extent anymore. But it will always be, if you have a loved one with a different culture, or if it will always be a different feeling to speak in your phone and have your phone translate instead of talking to somebody. So there are a lot of skills, I think, that you can learn, languages, philosophy, and all of these things, which smartphones and AIs won't be able to do for a long time, or maybe never. And so I would always say invest in those things. And so
how do Korean people
mathematics.
respond to this? Because it's great that you live the life. It's not hypocritical. We can always have some Jordan in society and then go and do these things. None of us are perfect, but you lead that life and you encourage your son to also live that life. How do Korean people, when you tell them about this, like no hug ones, if I were president, like we get rid of these, we change all these, do Korean people in general, we can't generalize them all, but do they look at you like you're crazy? Do they listen to you and go, that's a really good idea, but we can't do it because of these reasons? How do they resonate?
Yeah, I mean, first, mostly they kind of agree. If I say like this is how it is and tell me it's not, I'm happy to be standing here corrected if you tell me I'm wrong. But they say no, you're actually right, but it can't be changed for this reason. And then I said but I'm starting with my son to make a difference. And he said because you're a foreigner and and your son also he speaks German, he speaks English, so he can go anywhere, but our kids we're stuck in Korea here. And I said, of course, I would never say it's the same. No, it's not the same. My son has an advantage because he's 15. He's learning his fourth language now, and he has seen a lot more than most of these kids have seen or something. So it's not the same. No, but we don't live in the Stone Ages anymore, right? And there are airplanes, and there are scholarships, and and people do go abroad. So we live in a globalized world. If the kids really want to go abroad, then they should invest more in English skill. And I mean not memorizing vocabulary, but actually speaking English and learning languages or other languages, for example. Just today, for example, funny thing, I had lunch with a Portuguese guy. And he speaks fluent German, and so we're talking all the time in German. And at some point, I said like, "Oh, I completely forgot to ask because it comes around so natural, You're from Lisbon, right?" And he's like, "Yeah, I'm from Lisbon." So one of your parents is German or something? Why is your German so good? He's like, "No. Both my parents are Portuguese." And I said, "So where's your German from?" "Oh, we have a German school in Lisbon. It had a good reputation, so my parents sent me to German school. So until the age of 18 or 19, I studied in German school." And there he is, a Portuguese guy speaking fluent German. Yeah. So it's possible. And back then, because he went to school maybe 30, 40 years ago, he was almost my age, so close to 50. And so this was a long time ago. That time, Portugal was not a top-notch country or anything, but it was possible. And there's a German school here too in Seoul, and there are different schools, a French school, and so on and so on. So if you want to make a change, it's possible. So my main problem is excuses. People, like, for example, they see my house and say, "Oh, it's a dream house. I want to live in that kind of house." And I said, like, "You own an apartment in Seoul, right? You know that if you sell that apartment and come down here to Gwangju, where I live, you could buy a bigger house than this one with your apartment money." And they say, "Yeah, but I can't leave Seoul." I said, "Okay, then obviously it's not really your dream. Your dream is living in Seoul." And if you could get a nice house on the side, that would be. But your true dream is not this house or this or something like this. That people are saying, "Oh, that's my dream, but I can't." Well, then obviously it's not your dream. And I think that's kind of the thing that people make excuses. So when I come back to your question, what do people say? They mostly agree, but they mostly give me all the kind of reasons why it's different for them and why they can't educate their kids different because it would disadvantage them or something.
My very close South African friend, Christoph, his kids speak Afrikaans, English and Korean. He sent his son to German school. He sent his daughter to the French school. He said, "Dad, I can't speak it. Well, you're going to learn." And just off you go. And I love that about it. There was one line in your book that was one of the first ones I underlined, was that people would rather be unhappy in Seoul than happy outside of Seoul. And I read that and I underlined it. And I asked my Korean teacher and she was like, "지방은 지방이야." Like outside of Seoul, he's like this. And I was like, wow, it makes sense. When we were coming over here, Yoon, so I was learning a bit more about your education and how students like sign up for their classes and things like this. But your education and your parents and what's going on with you is a little bit different from the normal thing, something like that?
I think so, because my parents is the type of parents who highlights happiness over education just like you. And they just want me to stay healthy and happy. And then I can be like, it is okay to be like not in the top tier university when you're happy, and the happiness is not really related to the money or the education tiers or the job that you have. And not very much of my friends' family was type of that parents, because they believed that if you get more money, you get more happy. If you get the top tier university, you'll get more happier. So there are some of the stereotypical tiger moms of my friends, and some of them really succeeded to go to top tier universities that you can imagine of. But not all of them seems happy, but not all of them seems unhappy. And I can be unhappy too, but yeah, I can be happy as them are happy. Like, you know what I'm talking about, the happiness, the things. Yeah. But
it's the parenting. So you're young, you're 19, you've not been abroad, you've done it all here. You don't go to a top tier university, but you're relatively happy. You're dating, you're doing all these things, and it comes from the parents' influence.
Yeah.
It seems to be that's the important thing.
Very lot.
Yeah. Were your parents teachers? Or?
No.
No. Okay. There is a future here. And
absolutely.
What I just want to point about that is sometimes we hear the horror stories or we hear the very extreme parts of society. And sometimes there's this whole like silent majority of people, not all of it, and I'm not trying to defend it, but just hearing Yunso's, like what she was telling me about how she goes through is like, some people are going to survive, some people are going to make it through.
And I think also that the changes the storm that will come to this country, to be a little over dramatic, it will change people, and it makes crisis makes people rethink their position. For example, you have all these Gucci bags and all these Louis Vuitton clothing and something, and then you suddenly get really sick, and I mean not death, not even like a cancer or something, but you really feel sick and you have to lie down. You don't care at all about all the good things you have. All you want is a friend or your parents come over to take care of you and make a little soup for you. So it comes back. Crisis makes you rethink your original value. And for example, or if more extreme, you're on your deathbed and said like, okay, should I bring your wife to the bed or your Ferrari from the garage or whatever, like to be next to you? Would you have your old, maybe by that time ugly wife next to you, or your funky Ferrari if you have the money to own such a thing? I think 99% would choose this ugly long-time companion wife, which is a lot of wrinkles by now and stuff, over the fanciest car or diamond rings, because all these things can't give you happiness. So crisis makes you sort out your priorities again. So a crisis can be a cleaning process. I believe that in latest 15 to 20 years, Korean society will change dramatically, because due to the low birth rate, there will be not enough people to pay taxes. So the kind of wealth society that we have, I think, will crumble to some extent. I don't think it's a sustainable concept right now, because unless the birth rate goes up dramatically, which is a very, very unlikely scenario, then by the time in about 20 years or so, we have a huge group of elderly people who need, with big medical bills, and very few young people to actually support it in comparison. So what we're seeing with the start of what we see now will go up dramatically fast. So
Korea will become poorer, you think?
Yes, I think so. Because I think just the system is not sustainable at this point. So it's not gonna, I don't think it's gonna collapse, because it's a slow motion process. But people will have to adjust, and you can already feel this now slightly, that for example, the cost of living really goes up, and people start to check. Like yesterday, I was in a big mart near our house, and it was empty. It's like people are not shopping anymore. And I looked at the goods, and I was like, okay, I eat less today. It was so incredibly expensive, but so the cost of living goes up, the house prices, all the food and everything. labor cost also goes up, so going to the restaurant becomes more expensive, and so on and so on. But the wages don't go up in the same way. So what can the government do? They need to increase taxes over time to be able to pay the bills for the elderly people. And so I think this crisis that will come will clean out a little bit maybe this materialism, and people will start to realize that there are other values, and we have to re-examine our way of life and things like that. That is the positive outcome. We have seen a major global crisis, like when Corona started. I thought this could also be a cleansing experience, but it was very disappointing. It really rather reinforced. It brought the world not closer together, but further apart. But I think Korea maybe can pull this off. There's a famous comic novel called The Watchmen.
Okay.
It's I think from a British. It's I think from as far as I know, it's the only in the list of 100 most important books of humankind. It's the only comic book in there.
I bought it for my nephew. I haven't read it.
I
really?
Bought it
for him
you should read it. It's quite it's a fascinating work, and the idea of it is that at the end of the day they create an artificial crisis. So like a fake alien attack, which never happened, but they kind of created, with the hope that humankind will come together, because now they have a common outside enemy. So all the struggles that all the nations had, that was the kind of basic idea. That's why this was created, this scenario, so that the people would come together. And I thought, when Corona started and everywhere, Korea had a prime spot right here. It was one of the first nations where it really blew up, and I thought, wow. When this started to go all around the world, I thought maybe this is the kind of crisis which brings the people closer. Everybody is affected. It's kind of an alien invasion, and we all have to work together to overcome this. And man, was I wrong. Everybody just like, oh, more medicine for me, not for you, more for me, and all of these, and the whole
plastic surgery went up
during
the COVID pandemic, which I thought was hilarious.
Yeah, hilarious.
I thought I'm going to get my nose done.
Yeah, and mask, and still so many people wear masks, and this kind of people before Corona and after Corona, Korea changed a lot, but so. Not every crisis has to be a cleaning or a helpful thing, but it can be. So I hope that the crisis which is coming for Korea economically and with age development and things like this, which will be far worse, I expect, than what we had seen with Corona, could be a cleansing process where people reevaluate your life, and then it's people like you and like-minded people who have to lead the way and say like, okay, we've been preparing for this, and we this is the way we have followed, maybe to some extent was wrong. It has led us to this position. It has led us to where people don't want to have children anymore, where material goods define who we are and define our class. Okay, this has led us into this abyss where we're now. If we want to get out of it, we need to make changes. And yeah, like I said, I hope this will come. And I hope we'll live to see it.
Some European socialism, something like that. Is this pointing on the right door where you say, well, the rich people need to give up a little bit of this. We need to foster a little bit more community. We need to share it around economically, and that's a real tangible thing that governments can do. It's never going to be very popular if a government comes out and say, rich people, 60%, please. Something like this, because Europe has experienced tax levels that high.
Yeah.
Because I sometimes think, Anton, that in the next couple of decades, some of the most hyper-individualistic places in the world will be China, Japan, South Korea, because I see the young people, and the textbooks will tell you that this is a collectivist place and things like that, but I can see it becoming hyper-individualistic here. And maybe not for the better. Maybe not for the better.
Have you read just recently, it was also in the Korean press, there's a report that IKEA does every year, and it's about living in your home. And it's so they ask people around the world where they sell IKEA goods about how they the things they like to do at home and things like that. And Korea had top spots in all of the categories you don't want to have it. And so like what is the happiest thing you want to do at your house? Is like sleeping, and like this was much more popular than spending time with your family or with your friends, and things were also like also kind of other things that you want to do, or what is what is the happiest thing, and all of these things. And I was like, oh my goodness, like Korean people feel alone. Alone and sleeping is the happiness, is the greatest happiness that you can have, that kind of combination. So you don't want to meet your friends, you don't want to meet your family, you don't want to go outside anywhere, you want to be at home, alone, and perfectly sleeping. And that's where we come to. So I said in my book, I think like Korea is more of an outside the house culture, and European are more, for example, in-house. So you invite friends to your house, your girlfriend and boyfriend, and you have meetings with your family. Here, everything is done outside, meetings in a coffee shop and so on and so on. I think I have to revise that slightly, because now people order from home. They don't go out to food. They don't go shopping anymore. Everything is done by the internet. If possible, through apps, everything is delivered to your house, and people try to leave the house as little as possible if they can. And but it's not what I actually meant with this comparison, because I meant that Korean people don't really have this feeling, family coming to my house, friends coming to my house, and spending a lot of time, private time inside my house. But I have friends that I know for 20 years, and I have never seen their house. In Germany, that would be unthinkable, right. So everybody that I would call a friend knows my house.
What do you think is the reason for not seeing the house? Because I don't imagine it's embarrassment of the house itself, because sometimes people might have nice houses. Is it, what do you think? Because I agree with you 100%. House parties, dinner parties, come round, let's have coffee. It's very common in Europe, other parts of the world. Here in South Korea, I never stepped foot in my wife's house until the day we were married. It was only after we were married that I was allowed inside. Yeah. And once we were married, I could go in and put my feet up on the sofa. I never had to walk into the kitchen. There's a huge change between you're not part of our family to now, do as you please. Why do you think that this exists, that there's this in-house, out-house thing going on? It's very difficult to pinpoint, but...
I don't know. I think it actually comes from shame, because usually Korea used to be very poor, and houses was not a nice place for most people. If you don't have a nice Yangban house, so to speak, like your house was almost a shack, and so showing your house usually meant showing part of your poverty. And it is like the predecessor of the SNS avatar that you create. You can go out in a fancy suit with a nice car and project this image of being successful and rich, but your house is actually a little shack, but you don't care, because you never have to show it to anybody, right? But your car and your suit and your shoes and your Rolex or something, everybody can see. And the only time you get usually invited to houses is housewarming parties. So when the apartment is completely new and nothing has been touched yet, so it's clean as a whistle and everything is nice and neat, then they bring you to the house, one time show you around and maybe have a little bit of food, and then out, because 1 year later or so it will be, the kids have messed up everything, and it will not be that clean and nice an environment anymore. And so I think that people prefer to meet in a fancy restaurant, in a nice coffee shop or something, in an environment they don't where basically it's fancy and nice, and where they can choose how it is. But inviting people at house means you have to clean up, you have to
there's something very interesting that Korean people do as soon as they get home, which is they get changed. There's outside clothes, and as soon as you get in, get changed, and like you might have a shirt on, you might have jeans on, and back in the UK, I don't mean to compare it, but we'd sit around at home in jeans and a shirt, and some people even have their shoes on inside.
Right.
As soon as you get home in Korean, you just get dressed, and you're in shorts and t-shirts, you sat around on the floor, you're in your pajamas whenever you're at home, and maybe that's tied into it. There's a certain aesthetic or cleanliness to it, which makes sense, because you're not traipsing the outside dirt around. But whenever people come over to visit in Korea, I'm like, make sure you bring shorts and t-shirt.
Yeah.
You're going to be sat around on the floor, on sofas, in the house.
Yeah.
There's that aspect to it as well, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting. Basically, I've become very Korean in a sense.
You do the same?
I'm not wearing pajamas, but I do have my house set of clothing, which are a little bit more comfortable, I would say. And also, I do cooking, and so I wouldn't want to stand with my shirt and start cooking and things like that. So, or do the gardening with that kind of clothing. So, but for me, it's also to have a little bit of a separation because I travel a lot and I spend a lot of time outside of my house, being on business trips within Korea or outside of Korea. So coming home and having this kind of, okay, this is my space. But of course, I still more have an in-house culture, so in the sense that I always invite people to come to my house for dinner or even stay. We have when I designed our house, I specifically created a guest room with its own bath, so that we always have an extra room for guests. That's part of also our house philosophy. No fences around our house, a guest room with their own bath, so that anybody can walk in, basically. We also have no curtains, lots of windows, but no curtains. So everybody can look inside if they want to. Everybody can walk into our house, basically, if they want to. And there's a guest room if you want to stay. So
the no curtains perturbs me. As an Englishman, we're always closing.
I know the Germans mostly
kids.
too. Yeah, they build these nice houses with huge windows, and then they pull down the curtains, and you never can look inside. But I have nothing to hide. And
by the way, I think that Korean outhouse culture and Home Alone place can be true at the same time. So you don't have to revise because maybe Korean people do things outdoors. So they just want to leave their home as a black and white, the work and non-work place.
Yeah.
So I think that it just makes sense at the same time.
But still, even if it was work and non-work, which is also a little bit for me the case, that's why also, at home, I work a lot at home. I'm a little bit of a workaholic, but still I try to, through the, taking off my watch and things like this, putting on more comfortable clothes, not my pajamas, but something more comfortable.
You're really offended by that pajama.
No. I don't own pajamas. But that it feels a little bit of the separation. But at the same time, I'm always happy to invite people. So, but I invite not people for work. I invite friends. Sometimes, of course, also maybe business partners or something like this. Or sometimes. I have people from companies from abroad come and they say the weekend we have some appointments Thursday, Friday, and the next Monday, Tuesday, and I say, you know what, on the weekend I could leave you in your sorry hotel room in Seoul, but no, you're gonna come down to Gwangju and we'll have throw some meat on the barbecue, and we have you get into the guest room or something. So I think that this sense of letting people in and welcoming people to your house, that is very important. And that is something that Koreans are very restrictive on, I would say. They don't let you easily into their house.
Many house parties?
One of my friends is very open to invite us to her house, but not all of us are willing to bring friends to home, because for me, my room is not really tidy to invite my friends.
So it's the shame.
Yeah, it's the shame, as you said.
Yeah, you're right.
And I want to be seen as I want to show them aesthetic room, but my room is not very aesthetic for me to share with them, and I want my place to be my place, my own place, the place to rest. Because sometimes Koreans just make appointments with friends, which is another schedule, not just leisure. So I personally think that many Koreans have many different opinions, but for me, I think that my home should be my place.
And I think a lot of it comes down to people all want to live in Seoul, and it becomes this vortex that sucks everybody in. That's Henderson's old word. But you've escaped that.
Yeah,
you have. I mean, you've done the Gwangju. I try to do it as much as we can. Our kids are raised also in the countryside, and I see the beauty of living amongst the mountains, being able to see the horizon, not having traffic all over the place. Do you have any observations on this? Seoul being this vortex that sucks everybody in. You said you went down to Sejong city as a think tank. That was one attempt. They tried to impeach Nomifian, I think, about that for making a new capital, saying it was unconstitutional. But the role of Seoul in all of this, because you also talk about Germany having big cities, other big cities, and in the UK as well, London is a big place, but Manchester, Liverpool, Birmingham, Nottingham, etc. Any observations on that, Anton, how it works with the...
Sure, like you quoted me earlier when I said like people prefer to be unhappy in Seoul than being happy outside of Seoul, and I think this is there's a sad truth to it, but it wasn't always like that, and Seoul has developed into this kind of magnet, and it also has a little bit to do, I think, with real estate, that people believed like you can buy an apartment and 2 years later it's double the money, and so it always would go up, this kind of bubble, and then all the good universities there and all the good companies are there. Companies used to be, at different places. Samsung is not from Seoul, and Kia or something, they're not from Seoul, and Asiana and Kumo Group, so they're from Gwangju, for example, but all these companies, they moved to Seoul eventually during the dictatorship period to become developed, and then suddenly everything seemed to happen in Seoul. But this idea of Bunkwon, to separate, to break up this thing, like with the conglomerates, you have to break them up. They were a useful tool to develop Korea, but now they have kind of become the demon that haunts us. Because the devils that you called, calling them is one thing, getting rid of them is another thing, and with the conglomerates you have this issue, and Seoul is a little bit like that too. It has developed its own life, and it sucks people in and it sucks them out and spits them out dry, and because Seoul is not a place of great happiness, and still people fly to it like the moth to the light, just to get burned, and people could live a much more happier life. And I was talking to this guy, older guy. He's actually a 장인, so he like a really accomplished. He's making wooden furniture, and he's like a national treasure, living national treasure. And so he said, we were talking about these things, and he's this old Korean guy sitting and making his wooden furniture and things in Naju. And I said, I don't understand these kids killing themselves, There's patches of land lying around here. If you would just go there and work the land, you could make a living for yourself or something. Like, why don't they try something before killing themselves, But it's like this moving out of Seoul, it seems like there's this invisible barrier around the city. And if you go out of it, you fall into this pit, But the truth is, Seoul has become to some extent the pit. I love Seoul, and I love to come here. But I'm also happy to come back to Gwangju because it's much more serene. It's 20-30 minutes until the mountains, same distance to the ocean. Solal I would spend on Cheongsan-do, one of my favorite islands, and take a ferry ride there.
Tell me about that island, please. Cheongsan-do?
Yeah, Cheongsan-do. Cheongsan-do is a very small island, very few cars, and maybe 2 restaurants all together. But it's an incredible, beautiful place, and I mentioned the movie Seopyeonje in a post the other day. So director Im shot some of the pieces of his movie on Cheongsan-do. Okay. If you ever come down to the south, it's a ferry ride from Wando, but it's a little paradise to me. And I've spent many of my birthdays there or something. And this time, currently, our son is overseas. And my wife's parents are also overseas, so we're kind of just the two of us. So we'll go to Cheongsan-do and just chill for the long weekend. And it's just this little place where time has stopped, and people are still. But there are also a lot of old people. So the other day we were sitting in a restaurant there, and the policemen started sitting on the next table, and they start talking to us. Oh, a stranger, foreigner, and they're like, oh, he speaks Korean. I can hear that. And so talking, and I was like, yeah, Cheongsan-do. Oh, and I said, oh, I love this place. Oh, yeah. And we have so many young people here. He's only 65. He's only 68. And I'm like, wow, they're so young. And I'm like, yeah, so many young people here. And I'm like, Right. But other than that, so it's old people. I start to fit in more and more. No, but of course, these islands, it's a hard life, you know? It's battered by storms. More than once, we couldn't take the ferry because the storms, even for the short ferry ride, they just wouldn't go.
How long is the ferry ride, roughly?
It's just 1 hour from Wando. And so it's a rough island life. But people are happy, and you can see it because they have their hands on the earth, and they're living very simple lives, and they're very simple people, and all of the Seoul glitzy bitsy is very, very detached from these people. But those people who have not gone away, most of their kids have gone to Seoul, I suppose. But those people who have remained, and we talked about this beaming monks, or they have a little bit of that, and they are generous, and they are friendly, and they are laughing much more than the people that you see. And going to these places is always recharging my spiritual batteries.
And it's a pity we don't get to see them more, because you get to see them, and sometimes I get to see them out in the countryside. But I think when we look at Seoul, and whether it's through real life or through the media, things like this, there's many people that we forget to see, and there's people that we need to see. We need to see the old people that will just stop and talk to you and crack some jokes and make you feel a humane connection, and they're not easily accessible. Maybe there's the idea again that you have to struggle, you have to go through something, you have to go through hardship. You can't find them on Instagram.
Yeah.
You can't find them in your local convenience store. You actually have to travel for an hour, and you have to do something uncomfortable. And then that's where you find the reward. That's where you find something. Do you, I'm curious about this, do you find Seoul, or no, do you find Korea safe? This is one, I don't want to just try to be too positive on this, but I've always felt very safe here, and I always see like there's a lack of drugs in the street, and there's no needles in the park, there's no graffiti everywhere, there's no sort of antisocial.
Except on Gyeongbokgung.
Oh yeah. It was Doksugun, wasn't it? Like,
was it Doksugun?
I can't remember which one it was. Yeah. I'm not sure if you have chavs in Germany, like the ones with hoodies that stand outside the shop and smoke, and it's quite clean of that. Is it, or do you see it differently? The safety aspect, the clean.
I always say like Korea is so safe it's close to boredom. That is one of the great qualities I can say in Japan, for example, or so. So I can send my kid or my wife somewhere late night, and I don't worry, you know. Except for crazy driving, there is very little threat, I would say. Korean as a country is very safe. I could leave my film gear somewhere and come back, and it's going to be there. And so I don't lock my cars often or something, and even though they're easily accessible and things like that. So I feel very, very safe, and I think that is a great quality of this country. I often talk about the downsides of Korea, and maybe people think I only see the downsides, but that is not true. But talking about the good things doesn't really help in a way, because there are already so many people cheering on Korea and looking only at the bright sides. But there are many, many bright sides I see in Korea. I would have left Korea if I wouldn't be happy here. And this feeling of safety, that's really, really wonderful. I really enjoy that. Not having to worry, not having to look over my shoulder. That's something that is very, very different in Germany, for example, in many areas.
Yeah, 100% agree. There's a couple more bits just as we come round to the end. History. We've spoken a little bit about modern society and these problems here. Do you have a sense that Korea is unable to look at its own history square in the eye? As coming from somebody from Germany that's had to do a lot of self-reflection, as Brits, we need to do it as well. Japan has its own story and things like that. Korea has been focused on nation building. It's been torn in half. It didn't ask to be divided. It didn't ask to have dictators, and it's experienced all of that. I find sometimes one of the hardest stories in Korea to talk about with people is yeah, but what really happened? How did this history really play out? Because there's a grand narrative of what happened during colonization and the war and things like this. It's played out in movies and media. The Spring of Seoul has been the big movie recently. I get the sense that although it's necessary perhaps for some people, that Korea's history is sometimes more story than history. Do you have an observation on this? It's very dangerous ground that I'm getting into, and you can feel it, can't you? Because it's kind of easy to talk about birth rates and low marriage and these things, but the history of what happened, do you have a sense here, or do you have a sense how this story is playing out?
I wrote my master thesis on Korean history and Japanese Korean history. So yeah, I do have a sense about it, and I know this is very dangerous territory. And I spoke about historical issues in the Korean media and talk shows and before, and the response was not exactly positive.
I didn't know about this. Oh, okay.
Yeah, on several occasions, especially Japan-Korean relations and things like that, and. So you can still find the 댓글 about that, and you will find some really nice pieces there, calling me a Nazi and worse, so to speak. But be that as it may, yes, Korea has a big issue with history, and that is partially due to the fact that many older Koreans grew up in a time of dictatorship, so their history education was done in a time where somebody controlled where somebody was aiming to build a nation, to forge people together, if needed with certain myths. That has been done before with other nations. My country is definitely no exception there. But now we live in a more modern society, and we need to look at it more frankly. But many Korean people are not willing to look at history without prejudice. To give you a very simple example, I was also teaching at university for several years, and for some reason, once in a while, the Tokdo comes up. Like usually it's there's a certain rhythm. So Tokdo is back in the news, and then I just asked my students. So okay, I have a question because I'm a foreigner. I don't know. So is Tokdo is that Korean or Japanese? And they're like, Professor, you should know this, and la 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 la. It's Korean. And I said, okay, my bad. So why is it Korean? And they were like, and then it was already getting very quiet. And they were like, yeah, it's always been Korea. Okay, can we get a little bit more specific here? Is there a contract, or when was it? Since when was it Korea? Or like, because the Japanese say it's Japanese, right? Like, yeah, they have no idea. And I said, okay, what is the argument from the Japanese side? And then it was dead silent. And I said, okay, so let me put it like this. You know that Tokdo belongs to Korea, but you're just talking like parrots because that's what you heard from the media or from somebody, but you don't really know why. You have zero idea why the Japanese claim the island. So you know not even half of the story, but you're 100% sure of something, of a story where you don't even know your half properly, and you don't even know the other half at all. So basically, you don't know nothing. And they didn't like that, of course, but that is my job as a professor, to challenge my students and not to pat them on the backs all the time, but rethink. If you want to talk about history, you need to hear both sides of a story. Otherwise, if you only know half the story, you don't know nothing. And most Koreans don't even know their half of the story properly. So another thing is because of Japanese relationships, this is a typical topic I'm asked a lot because I'm German. So we have this, Germany did so well and you apologized and you worked on your history, and Willy Brandt went to Poland and put down his knee and begged for forgiveness. And I said, yes, this is all good things we did. But still, this Japanese Korean history is not as black or as white as you like to paint it. It's much more complex than that. But they never apologized properly, and I said, well, okay, that's a thing of debate. I don't want to get into this because this is a whole different story again. But just one more thing, I said, like, well, did the Koreans properly apologize to the Vietnamese people for the massacres they did there? Like, oh, they did massacres? Oh, yeah. Mm-mm. Or was it more that, for example, there is actually a tablet put up in one of the villages where the biggest massacre happened? It's near Da Nang. And the Korean government intervened and had this tablet overpainted, so to speak, to cover up their own massacres. And did Chon Do-han ever come to Gwangju and apologize to the victims of Oilpal? And did he ever come and apologize? Ever? So I don't want to say it's the same thing, because it is not. But giving some of these examples also shows Koreans are also not exactly always on the top of the list when it comes to apologies. And Vietnam, of course, the scale of this whole thing, I don't want to compare it, because the scale of what happened in Vietnam and the scale of what the Japanese did here is not on the same level. I don't want to have any misunderstanding about that. But apology is apology, and massacre is massacre. And if it's 100 people or 1,000 people, do we want to count people's life to measure how important it is? I think the mindset is important. And the Korean government, from all I know, has intervened with what happened in Vietnam to get away this kind of memory tap, so that people are not reminded of what the Korean soldiers did there. So, and isn't that the same mindset that you kind of talk to the Japanese, that they should fix their own history? And I totally agree that the Japanese need to do that. They need to come clean with their own history. They need to apologize more properly and more in depth and things like that. But Korea also has to deal with their own history properly. Sasam Sakwan in Jeju-do is not fully resolved to me yet, and not enough educated enough, and those things. When I came here in '94, I never even have heard about Sasam Sakwan. I found out about it in '97, '98 or something, and I said, how, as a student of Korean studies, could I have not known these things happening here? Because it was almost illegal until the late 90s to even talk about this event. So Korea is also trying to put their dark history under the rug. And there might be other nations like England, like Germany, like Japan, who have a bigger bulb under the rug because they have much more dirt to put under there. But it doesn't mean Korea is free of those things. And you should always work up your own, dirty history before you approach other nations to clean up their mess. And so I do think, yes, Korea needs some cleanup to do. And some of it is on this historical level of what happened, massacres and things like this. But also it needs to work up this history of like Tanil Minjok or something like this, another historical lie. And this pure Korean race thing or something like this. These are not helpful in times where we need foreign people to come here, because we can't do the labor ourselves anymore, or don't want to do the labor ourselves anymore.
I agree with you, because as a student in Korea, I didn't really learn much about our history, ourselves, or our faults that we did to other countries, just like Vietnam. But we learned much more about Japan and Korea issues like Dokdo or sexual slaves, but we don't really learn much about, and we don't really reflect on our history at enough extent. So I agree with you saying that we should more talk about it and we should learn more about it.
Does the Jeju massacre get covered much at school?
Not much, very shortly.
Sometimes there's a lot of Korean on Korean death and killing that goes on during the Korean War, during the massacres, as it went with Gwangju, with Jeju. I see some progressives from around the world, they try to blame it all on America and remove agency from Koreans.
Yeah.
There is that perspective, I think, that gets a lot of traction. They say it was all America, it was the United States military, and sometimes Korean people do these things.
Yeah.
It seems possible in the United Kingdom and Germany and other countries to be a dissident historian, to be a critical historian, to be a Chomsky, to be an E.H. Carr or something like this. E.H. Carr's book was banned here for a long time, which I found fascinating. But it feels it's not quite possible yet in Korea to be a historian in that sense. And I also wonder if there's something else in apologies here. There's that Is it shame or something like that? Is it because they're so close? It was David Mason that said to me, it's because they're actually brothers and sisters rather than this whole Tanil Minjok, that when you look at them, they come from similar places, and there's nothing like it when a family fights. You know, that really, when brothers and sisters get at it always, I sometimes ask my students, would it be possible to write a history of Northeast Asia that everybody agreed on? And they look at me and they go, no way. And then it's like, well, then does history exist? Or are we all just telling stories that we like? Because a lot of things have happened here in the last 120 years. And I think to move forward, we need to try to make sense of them. And last point on this, it was La Jong-il, former ambassador to the United Kingdom under Kim Dae-jung. He wrote a fabulous piece in Korean a couple of years ago where he was talking about the Hanil Gwange, Korea-Japan relations, and he said it's like two people tugging a rope and they're both pulling as hard as they can. And he said what we need to realize is if we let go, we win. If we let go of this battle, the other person will fall down. You know, if we just stop pulling the rope, if we stop doing that, because my kids from the age of 3 would come home and go, they would have all of these things. But it's such a sensitive topic here. I think you're very brave for addressing that. I remember reading the doctor part in this book, actually, and I think of all of the things that you covered, I didn't mean to try to get you into trouble here. That's incredibly brave of you, I think.
Last year, there was the Independence Day, and I was invited to Baekpun Toron, which is a very popular talk show in Korea, well watched. And the writer called me and said, like, we want you to talk about Korean-Japanese relations, and we know you know quite a bit about that. You lived in both countries, and you wrote your thesis on that. She had researched my previous things on that. And I said, okay, I'm willing to come. But this is a live program, so there's not going to be any editing. And she said, I know I'm a writer for this. And you know what I'm going likely to, like, this is not going to go down well with a lot of Koreans, what I'm going to say. It is the kind of history many Koreans don't want to hear, or something, or an opinion many people don't want to hear. And she said, like, well, if you're brave enough with the fallout of your comments on live TV, then we're going to be brave enough to host you. But there were many calls after that to never invite me again. But I've been re-invited to Baekpun Toron after that. What I also tried to talk about, for example, when it comes to this Japanese things, there's a legal obligation and there's a moral obligation, and Korean people mix that together, and that is not a good idea, because legally everything was solved in the Treaty of San Francisco in 1965, and Korean people have to accept that. Was that a good treaty? Was it a fair treaty? That's not the discussion. A treaty is a treaty. That's the idea of things. There is a moral obligation Japan has, and that I completely agree on. But the legal part of that is closed. That's why Japan, for example, said, like, okay, let's go to the International Arbitration Board, and they can judge. And the Koreans objected that, because the Koreans know, of course, that legally they cannot win this. The Japanese would win either way in the legal battle on this thing, because everybody would say, sorry, contract, you signed this, done, over. That is why I was not happy with, for example, the Moon Jae-in government supporting this idea of Japanese assets being taken here in Korea. I think this was a mistake, because it is not in the framework of international law. But pushing the Japanese to further apologize, I think that is something we can do, and that we should do, because they have a moral obligation to apologize deeper and to work on their own history and solve these issues. But we should focus on the moral part and not on the legal part. If we mix these things together, then from the outside, actually we undermine our own position, because always people will say, listen, this has been closed.
I think it's very interesting with the 1965 treaty, where the Park Chung-hee government received that money from Japan and the compensation, that I'll happily stand corrected on this, that Park Chung-hee didn't use that money to enrich himself. He didn't go around building huge statues of himself in the country. Yes, he was a very authoritarian leader by the end of his time, but the Seoul Busan Expressway and things like this, he was very much focused on, we need money, we need to do stuff. So it wasn't just enriching himself. Maybe just two more questions on this history thing. I'm not sure if you want to address either of them. One would be, do you have any insight into the Japanese position? So you've given us sort of some different perspectives on how Korea are approaching all of these issues. Obviously, Japan is a big country. There's not just one Japanese position. But do you have any insight into how Japan is looking at this history at the moment? And the second one would be perhaps even more controversial. Do you think, therefore, that what President Yoon and Yoshida are doing, they're going to different memorials with each other and they're spending time with each other, and this is making a lot of people go, yes, that's good, and it's making a lot of people very angry, but there is a concerted effort to break from the previous Moon administration and to try to do this.
To your first question, there's a big difference between Germany and Japan in what happened after Second World War. Germany received the chance of a new start. Because basically the whole Nazi leadership, really to 90% or so, of course some people remained or something, but mostly the whole top, the head was chopped off from the snake. So Germany had a new start after World War II, Nuremberg processes and things like that. There were Tokyo trials as well, and a few people got a few prison sentences and so on, and a few people even got executed. But overall, the Americans, I think they didn't understand. They understand how Germany works. It's a Western mindset. It's kind of like, okay, we can understand this. And they know if we chop off the leadership, there are still enough intelligent people to rise up and fill the void and bring this to a democratic in the direction of a democratic country. In Japan, they should have killed the Tenno, for example, the Japanese emperor, through this involvement in this, and they should have chopped off the whole leadership. But then they realized also, first, we don't understand how the Japanese mindset really works. So if we chop off the head, we don't know what will happen in this country if we can control whatever is left. Second, they realized everything is so top down. If they chop off the head, the whole thing might likely crumble. But they needed Japan. They needed a strong Japan. Somebody even from the Japanese government one time said, we're just this unsinkable air carrier for them.
Anti-communist bulwark, was that the necessity? Because
they understood that with China and Russia, the East is red, and that's the last thing they wanted. And it's a protection barrier between China and Russia and the US, right? So it's this kind of unsinkable carrier they had there. So they needed a strong Japan. So they kind of made this deal in a sense to say, like, okay, we punish them a little bit, but leave the structures as they are. Abe, who was shot last year, I think, was the grandson of one of major criminals, war criminals in Japan. So basically, let's say it would be like the grandson of Goebbels or somebody ruling the country or something. All these people, like basically from these families who were originally involved in a lot of this bad part of Japanese history, they're still in charge. So that they don't have a big interest in working up that kind of history is partially understandable to some extent. It's not good, it's bad. But here I have to say that the Americans did make a big mistake to some extent, that they didn't give Japan the chance for a real new start, but they left a lot of the structures in place to be able to control things. They understood we won against the Japanese, so the Japanese are in awe, so we can pull the shots here and bring them in a very pro-American direction, which is happening to this day. But it also meant leaving structures who supported the war and the things that happened in Korea, the things that happened in Southeast Asia and China and Manchukuo and all of these things. All of these people mostly were left where they were, a little bit punished or going to jail for 1 or 2 years, and then they went out and became had again great positions within the government. So through that process, you still have structures where a lot of people have family relations or something with people who did crimes in the war. So that's why people go to Yasukuni shrine. That's why people don't want to address these issues in the history books. And to part two of your question,
can I just ask one follow-up on that?
Yes.
I'm very sorry to great memory. I sometimes hear from some people, very educated and well-meaning people, Andrew Salmon might be one, for example, that the crimes of Germany and the crimes of Japan were different. And so when it comes to apologies, Germany, genocide, there were apologies for what it did, whereas apologies for colonization aren't very normally forthcoming from any countries. And so where we sometimes put Germany and Japan together, some people will say, well, we're comparing apples and oranges a little bit here. Do you have any sense of whether that's an appropriate perspective, or no, we should put these both together and say what Japan did with its sort of experiments and the rape of Nanking and the comfort women, etc.? You understand the perspective there?
Yes, and I think it's not entirely wrong. I think Britain, also Germany, took a long time to apologize to, for example, Namibia or something for the massacres that German government did there. So yes, I would say what Japan did was not a classic colony. Because what they did in Korea is try to erase the Korean identity. That is not colonization. That is kind of a genocide in some way, because they tried to erase the Korean people's identity. So that is a much worse crime than what the normal colonizers did, which try to just exploit the labor, exploit the raw materials, like be it cotton or spices or whatever countries had, what the British did in India, for example. They didn't try to erase Hinduism or something like this, or they didn't force them to have British names or something like this and change their language at school or anything. So what the British did in their colonies was nothing nice. But it is still different from what the Japanese did and the experiments in Manchukuo and things like that. That was terrible, terrible stuff happening there. And what the Nazis did is, again, a whole other level again. So I would say it's a middle ground. So yes, maybe they cannot be forced to apologize from a legal perspective, or then a lot of nations have to apologize to a lot of other nations, which cause a possible chain reaction. But on the other hand, I would also say that what the Japanese did, in particular with Korea, it goes far beyond what normal colonization would do. So I think it's a difficult thing to call, and I do think the Japanese people, there's often this what people say, they never apologized, which is BS. They did apologize. There's a list on Wikipedia, you can look it up, and so on. So
the apologies weren't serious enough.
Exactly.
They visited the shrine the next day.
Yeah, exactly. But who's the judge of that? Things like that. So when is it enough? But I would also say, yes, it is not enough, and there needs to be something more sincere. Maybe really a head of state needs to come, kneel down like Willy Brandt did, and really say, we messed up, we am terribly sorry, and something like this. And maybe then maybe we will see such a leader at some point in time, and maybe we can do that. For the time being, which leads me to your second question, I do think that what Yoon Suk-yeol is doing in this regard, the president is doing, is right. Mending the ties with Japan is right for several reasons. Economically, we need this relationship. I think we're living in a world where the world order is shifting. We have about 25 to 30 years of relative peace in the Western world, and this dream of friendship. We could be friends with our old enemies. We were friends with Russia. We were friends with China. We get cheap energy there. We get cheap labor there. Everybody works with everybody. It's supply chains, and everything works out. And this is all falling apart now. So we have to look very clearly where our allies are. And we might have we means Korea, have a difficult history with Japan. But still, Japan is still our ally much more than I think China, if you look into the future. China, under Xi Jinping, is on a path to destruction, I think. And if something happens like what happened with Russia and Ukraine with Taiwan, then that will be a whole new scenario. So at that point in time, so from an economical and geopolitical safety perspective, yes, we have unresolved issues with Japan, but yes, we need Japan. And Japan also needs us. So there are very few allies, true allies, that we have. And we have a potential threat always from North Korea. We have a potential threat from China and Japan. Despite its past, I lived there for several years. I think the people are very pacifistic to a large extent. And I don't think, even if the Japanese changed Article 9, I think it is of their constitution to upgrade their military again to some extent. They're not gonna. Not like Germany, we're not invading any country anytime soon, and neither will the Japanese. But we have to look beyond some of these historical issues, and sometimes let bygones be bygones. And this doesn't mean like we completely forget. This doesn't mean we push for apologies and working on these issues. But it also means to let some of the hate go. Because hate, like they said, is a knife all blade. You hurt yourself as much as you hate somebody by stabbing.
And you've been very clear to emphasize the moral obligations of Japan to apologize and things like this. But this is a dangerous part of the world. I mean, the whole world feels dangerous. But I mean, when you look, there's North Korea, there's Russia, there's China. This is a place where you need friends, I think. Yes. And we sometimes underestimate Korea's democracy because it's easy to be a democracy in Western Europe. It's a lot harder to be a democracy here, and that's what Korea has done. I'm not sure whether I should ask you this. You don't have to answer, but this idea that everything else aside, right, all other politics and yogabu and everything like this, that the president, by going and trying to mend ties with Japan and do these things, is the right thing or it's the wrong thing? It's too sensitive? Or
I think that we should make link between Japan and Korea too, as you said in our conversation, because just staying angry at a country just don't change the history that has just happened, right? And then the interesting thing that you said was we are somehow confusing moral and law thing. And I didn't really realize it before you say it, honestly, because we just learned that, Japan has done such things to our country, and as we said before, 독도 is 우리 땅, and Japan has been colonizing us, but we didn't really learn much about how to do in the future or how to do in present. So
and there is a future coming. Yeah. You know, the fascination between the culture of Korea and Japan, like so many of my Japanese students, they love K-pop and they love BTS. There was this fascinating presentation. One of my Japanese students here in this classroom, Chihiro, she interviewed all her Japanese friends. What do you think of Korean men? They are tall, they are handsome. There was, it was a very positive vibe, and maybe the future of culture, and there's a long way to go. But I just want to say one more time on the record that I nearly didn't ask about history, but I'm so glad that I did, because I think the perspectives and you provide, as well as the bravery, is incredible, because you spoke about negative reactions online, and I sometimes, Korean students might say to me sometimes, you know more about Korean history than me, than the students, because I teach certain things, but I am also guilty sometimes of self-censoring. Because I know of the sensitivity and I know how things happen, and you're in that sense, you're an inspiration with the bravery that you speak, Anton. I think it's very amazing.
Thank you. I spoke before on a different topic when we said we engage ourselves with our fears, right? And we build a prison out of our own fears, and this refers to all aspects of life, I think. And if we live in a society where we feel we cannot express ourselves and our own thoughts and opinions, I would never say that what I say is the truth and it's an absolute thing. I always be happy to discuss with people, and I might be wrong on things too. There might be aspects of history I don't know, I'm not aware of or something, and I'll be happy to hear from somebody and be corrected. I think that's a positive process. But until that moment, I will try to express my own thoughts and opinions as free as possible. And also my wife told me on several occasions, you shouldn't say this, and we'll get into trouble for this. And I said, if we live in fear from opinions of others, then this is not a democracy anymore, and then this is not a free country anymore. And so we need to be fearless with our own lives, taking our lives into our own hands, making difficult decisions, and sometimes saying things that are unpopular. And that sometimes mean being cancelled from TV shows, like I was, for things that I said that weren't popular. It was not that people said, it was not that I said something wrong. They just didn't like it.
I get that.
Yeah, and but I learned nothing from that, except that I will keep doing this. And if people don't want to talk to me because they don't like to hear what I say, then they don't have to talk to me. But I will not bend my or self-censor myself because I think that is the wrong way if we want to bring this country forward.
I think as well as fear, sometimes perhaps there's an economic obligation or a commitment when I have young children and things like this that sometimes crosses the minds. But very powerful words. One of the last question I'm going to ask you, is there anything else that we've missed, Yun sir, while you have Anton here? It feels like we've had a lecture.
Yeah.
It's been brilliant.
Yeah, I think that I've learned so much things enough.
This will be a strange thing. Could you perhaps just give us a closing statement in Korean? And the reason, I know I'm putting you on the spot, and I'll just talk a sec, but I think there might be some people, maybe, I'm not sure, that just underestimate it or are not quite appreciative of it. And we joked about it at the start, like how well you do speak, and I think that I don't want that to be ignored alongside everything else that you've said. I don't mean this in a bad way.
No.
그냥 뭐 마지막 말씀 있는지 한번 듣고 싶습니다.
지금 의미 있는 얘기 좀 해야 되겠네요. 먼저 원래 생각해야 되는데 그 다음은 의미적인 얘기 할 수 있는데 먼저는 사실 재미있는 게 오늘 저도 먼저 초대해 주셔서 너무 감사하고 그냥 재미있는 대화 사실 또 길게 할 수도 있는데 근데 그 시간이 없어서 지금 점점 마무리해야 되는데 근데 저한테 되게 신기한 게 거의 영어로 이렇게 대화하는 게 거의 처음이거든요. 지난 몇 년에서 뭐 TV나 뭐 팟캐스트 뭐 여기저기 인터뷰 많이 했는데 근데 영어로 이렇게 얘기할 수 있는 게 또 되게 즐거운 경험이었어요. 저한테는. 왜냐하면 한국말 얼마나 잘해도 당연히 영어만큼 독어만큼 잘하는 게 아니고 그래서 조금 더 정확하게 표현할 수 있는 것 같아요. 그래서 가끔 내가 걱정하는 게 TV 아니면 어디서 나가게 되면 이렇게 민감한 테마에 대해서 얘기하면 사람들 제가 하고 싶은 말 제 마음에서 정말 표현하고 싶은 게 정말 딱 제대로 표현했는지 안 했는지 난 가끔 100% 확실하지 않아요. 그래서 항상 약간 이런 두려움도 있는데 그냥 이런 두려움 넘어가서 그래도 전 항상 노력하고 있어요. 그래서 정말 사람들 화나게 만들고 싶은 게 아니고 사람들 생각하게 만들고 싶어요. 그리고 나는 틀리다고 생각해도 그냥 화내지 말고 그냥 저랑 만나고 가르쳐 주세요. 정말 그런 마음 되게 중요하다고 생각하고 그냥 100% 확실한 게는 전 세계에서는 아예 없다고 생각하고 정말 우리는 항상 두려움 없이 우리 의견을 표현해야 되는데 근데 다른 사람 다른 의견이 있으면 열린 마음으로 그거는 받아야 된다고 생각하고 그렇게는 정말 민주주의 그거는 정말 평화로운 좋은 나라가 만들 수 있다고 생각하고 그거는 제일 중요하다고 생각합니다.
네, 감사합니다. Anton,
it's been a pleasure.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
How brave is this young woman?
Yes, wonderful.
19 years old,
Yes.
dreams of being a presenter.
Yes, wonderful. So how did you guys meet or what's your connection?
University.
Yeah, university.
You're a student of his or?
Yeah.
I see.
I took 3 of his lectures last semester. So
Oh, wow.
yeah.
So it's like, you seem very committed and dedicated. You
Yeah.
want to do something.
Yeah.
Let's go.
Yeah.
And I think it just provides a nice counterbalance to
Yes,
things.
no, I really think it's very good because otherwise it's two white old guys talking, and this gives this kind of young Korean perspective. And also so it gives us more credibility in a certain way.
In a way,
yeah. Because somebody could watch us and like, these two guys, like they have their own ideas about Korea and Korea's that and that, but Koreans might see this completely different. But you being here and voicing your own opinions and views of the topics we're discussing. This gives more credibility to the whole discussion as such. And I wish we would have much more of this kind of format actually overall in Korea. But actually, as we all know, discussion culture is not a big thing in Korea. You know, it's like everybody giving their speech and then that's it.
That's it.
Yeah.
Good thing.